Another episode of PNE Pod, the official podcast of the one and only Preston North End Football Club. My name's Niall McCaughan, joined as always by former Deepdale striker Niall Mellor, and joined today by a very special guest. Peter Ridsdale is here with us. Peter, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. This is the start, I'll tell you at the end of it.
Well, let's start with the present, because what a season North End are enjoying at the moment. You must be really pleased in your position to see how well Hecky and the lads have done so far.
Well, I'm obviously delighted we've done well so far, but I've only played 15 games and I've been around too long. It's a 46-game season. So if we're still there or thereabouts of where we are now at the end of the season, I'd be delighted, particularly after the last game of last season. But I'm delighted the way Paul's gone about his job. You know, he's very impressive. The players enjoy working with him. They respect him. And yeah, it's better sitting fourth in coming out of an international break than further down the table, because it's a tough division. Although, funnily enough, probably a more even division than I've seen for a long time. Yeah,
well, I mean, we're here at Exton today, and there's no denying, Mel's will agree, that there's a real feel-good factor around the place. Like you say, it is the international break, but still all the staff, everyone in good spirits, and I suppose that proves that results on the pitch do translate to the mood and the morale around a football club.
Everything everybody here does is to try and help the players win football matches. We can't do it the same way as the players can, but the feel-good factor is, you know, we win and lose together. So we want to win more often than we lose. And the staff are obviously enjoying the fact that on the field we're performing. I think even the 3 games we've lost so far, we look back at those, and certainly in 2 of the 3 we question refereeing decisions, which I know they're supposed to even themselves out, but West Brom away, where the key match incidents panel said we should have had a penalty at 0-0. Obviously Birmingham at home, which the key match incident panel says was a handball by Birmingham, and we lost it 1-0. Arguably we should have had at least 1 if not 2 penalties. And Portsmouth away, to be fair to them, they scored a very good but deflected goal, and I thought we played well but got beat 1-0. So we've been in every game, and I think when you are in every game you stand half a chance, don't you? So let's just hope for the rest of the season we can carry on as we've started.
What's changed from last season? Because last season wasn't an enjoyable season in terms of where Preston were, and now it just feels completely revitalised. There's been good recruitment over the summer. It's been a good start. So Preston are in a position where they can have real aspirations and hopes that it can be a successful season. But has there been a factor for you that's changed this season?
Well, look, when you're changing managers, in the ideal world, you change them at a time when it suits you, but ideally in the summer. We've just seen 4 of our rivals have to change mid-season, which is not ideal. And last year we had to change, I was going to say after 1 game, but in the end we changed after 2 league games and a League Cup tie. So Paul came in and essentially inherited the squad, because we'd obviously done the team building. We made a couple of changes in January, and of course Lewis Gibson coming in was outstanding work, I think. But essentially Paul was told that we'd done the business in terms of the spend in the summer he came in, and he had to get the best out of what he got, recognising that in the summer we've just come out of, we had an opportunity to freshen it up and bring in the players within our financial means that Paul wanted. And I think we brought 12 players in the end, 12 or 13 players with recent short-term additions. So that's a massive change in a 25-man squad. And obviously the manager decides which players he wants within the realms of what we can afford. So I think the balance between the loans, who look outstanding, the permanents who have settled in well, the balance in the squad, because I think we have got, when fit, 2 in every position, and then we've got a manager we believe in. So the combination at the moment is working, which is very nice.
The loan market is so crucial to many clubs, certainly in the Football League, and Preston have had some good loans over the years, haven't they? You only have to look at the current England national team, how many have featured at North End.
Yeah, it's a difficult market in the sense that, you know, the supporters, first of all, say don't ever fall in love with a loan player because they're not there for very long. And whilst I understand that, you know, when you've got a wage bill that we've got, the opportunity to use the loan market well means, in terms of value for money, you can get a quality of player that sometimes we can't attract on a permanent basis. So to the degree you can do that and you can top it up, and then the players who want to be here, as opposed to just loan players for the wrong reasons, So if it's done properly, it can be a massive boost. And as you already say, you know, we've had some great loans over the last few years from, you know, Jordan Pickford and Anthony Gordon and Liam Delap and Alvaro Fernandez and, you know, Tom Cannon, Cameron Archer. You know, we've done very well. I'm sure I've missed some out there, but Troy Parrott, for example, was here, who scored that hat-trick for Ireland the other day. It's a very important market, but you've got to make sure the balance is there so that when they go, the rest of the squad don't suddenly look bereft of talent. And I think the players were brought in on a permanent basis have been very good as well. You know, we've obviously brought in Daniel Everson, brought in Thierry Small, and we brought in Adele. And, you know, if just look at the permanent signs we brought, Michael Smith, we had the opportunity, Paul from Sheffield Wednesday, given their problems. I think the recruitment this year has been as good as it's been for a long time, but in part because we had so much to do. And in terms of the investment levels, because we haven't got a lot of spare cash, I think it was used very well, and I think Paul's moulded it into a very good squad.
Just on the loan players, when you list them off like that, that must be a real benefit when you are approaching clubs to take players on loan. You can point to that list and you can say, well, this guy now plays for Real Madrid, this guy plays for England, Preston North End is the place to come if you want to develop and grow as a player.
I added up the other day that I think that the loan players just over the last 5 years have gone for in excess of 250 million in terms of transfer fees, which we don't get anything from, benefit from that. So I think the clubs that we've worked with, you know, just look at Sepp van der Berg at Liverpool, you know, he went to Brentford for a lot of money, but enjoyed his time here. The clubs that we deal with and regularly help us recognise that they do get a massive benefit out of loaning players here, because in the main we bring them here to play regularly, and if they play regularly they're going to enhance the value, and I think we've demonstrated that, so hopefully the opportunity to carry on in that market will continue.
When you are doing a deal for a loan player as opposed to a permanent one, how different is that to sort of negotiate with player, agent, club sort of thing?
What's changed over the years is that the clubs used to accept that you couldn't afford to pay full recovery on their wages. That was fine whenever they didn't pay them a lot of money. But over the last few years, some clubs have started paying their younger players a lot of money, and way above what we could afford to pay. And then you rely on them wanting to do a deal because they recognise that the experience here is valuable. So it has become more complicated than it used to be. Some clubs are very helpful in terms of what we pay because they recognise the benefit of it. Other clubs are less easy to deal with. And of course, if they are any good, you've got a lot of competition for those players in the first place. What I think we've got now is Paul talks to every one of the players before we can get the financials done, but with the club's permission. He's been a very big attraction in the players wanting to come here. If the player then says to the parent club, we want to come to Preston North End, makes my job of negotiating the deal easier. There's often penalties that are very expensive if you don't play them. And I've always said to the manager, I won't tell you what those deals are, because a player must come here and get in the team because they deserve to, not because the contract says they have to. So that's a complicating factor as well. But there's no doubt that our recent reputation of loan players turning out into very good, either valuable assets for the clubs or playing for the clubs, is as good as anybody's, I think.
Tell us a little bit more about Paul Heckingbottom, because you've already mentioned him a couple of times, and obviously the recruitment, he's had a hand in that as well. You'll probably be able to tell us that there were, I think, upwards of 100 applications for the role this time around when Hecky got the job. So what was it about him, and what are the attributes that he has that impressed you so much that you were like, this is the guy to lead North End forward?
It became more complicated, and I had to deal more quickly than I wanted, because first of all, Ryan left after one game, which was a shock. He asked to see me on the Sunday and said he'd had enough after one match. We then thought we'd limp through to the international break, which was about 3 weeks later. But obviously after the second league game at Swansea, Mike Marsh said, I don't want this anymore. So we had a problem. In the meantime, I'd got, and it was less than 100, it was probably high 60s of applications.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot. But what I did was I wrote them in and put them into different categories. So first of all, those I'd never heard of, which is not very helpful. Those who wanted to step into the first job as a manager but had been coaches with experience. Some who'd been here before. Some who I thought getting them out would be complicated. And some I thought were a very good shortlist, but we just needed to do a bit more work. Paul stood out on the list from day one. When we got in the car to come back up from Swansea, I wasn't driving, listening to it, I was on the phone all the way back. I phoned 3 or 4 people who I knew who'd worked with Paul before and really drilled down into how he was, how he managed, how he fitted into an organisation structure, the structure we've got here where we'd have a sporting director, for example, and whether they thought it would work. And everyone said to me the same thing: he's a perfect fit for Preston North End. I then phoned Paul, who was at Filey in a caravan.
Yeah, he said he was on holiday when he spoke to us, and he got a phone call from you.
Yeah, so he was in Filey in a caravan, and I said to him, "How long are you there for?" He said, "Till whenever." I said, "No, you're not." I said, "We'll meet tomorrow." So he drove over to Exeter, and we spent hours together. And the thing that was interesting about him is he said, "When I get there, I want a whiteboard with some magnetic sort of discs for players on, and I'm going to show you how I'll work with your squad," as if that made a difference to me. He was giving me a compliment, I suppose. Yeah. But he just talked through the squad, the strengths, the weaknesses, how we'd play, how he saw us playing. I then, after a few hours, phoned Craig and said, "Do you fancy joining us?" Craig came over for half an hour, and then left me and said, "Well, you know what you're doing, and crack on." So we offered Paul the job that night. Dealt with his agent the next morning, and contract was signed by the afternoon. So it happened very quickly in the end. But having started off with a very long list, and it was a bit overwhelming, we narrowed it down into different categories, then into those who were gettable, the cost of getting them. The cultural fit, I think, is something that too few football clubs look at. I spent 14 years in human resources before I was let loose on running companies, real companies, before I got into football. And when you're recruiting somebody of this important in terms of a manager's position within a football club, most companies go through a very clear process of cultural fit, what they've done, strengths and weaknesses, management style. I think too many football clubs rely on what you've done in the past. Well, that's great, but actually, does that work where you're going to be going forward? And when people start talking about stats and everything else, that's great, but that just tells you history. What you need to know is how will it work within your environment. So I'd like to think we spent a lot of time with Paul talking about him and here and the cultural fit and how he works. And, time will tell. But so far, I think that's worked.
Yeah, you've been at PNE now for almost 14 years. So what would you say the culture is of the club now, and how has it changed and sort of evolved over the years? What would you put your finger on in terms of the culture of North End?
It's difficult to say, really, because obviously it has evolved. I mean, when I came here, obviously it was owned by Mr. Hemmings, and I had a very close relationship with him. Speak to him 8 times a day, 10 times a day, including weekends. Most of the time about football, sometimes about anything he wanted to talk about. But he cared passionately and was a very, very interested owner. He wanted to know everything. And it wasn't that he made the decisions for you, but what he did is he tested you to make sure you knew what you were doing. So he challenged you a lot. And I learnt a lot from him. I think culturally we've continued with obviously the Hemmings family ownership, and it's evolved in the sense that Craig doesn't phone 8 or 10 times a day. But he's certainly more involved because obviously he comes to the home and away games, and of course recently we've had a change with Ian coming in on a non-exec basis. But I think the thing about Preston North End is, one, we try and do things properly, which I know sounds an obvious thing to say, but that's not always the case in football. If we can't afford to do something, we don't do it, even recognising we'll get a lot of criticism for that. And I think we try and build teams. So I describe our football squad as a jigsaw puzzle. What we try and do is put in the missing pieces in the shapes rather than a collection of individuals. That sometimes means that the sum total of the parts is stronger than any individual. So when people say you've no stars, you haven't got this, I think they're being disrespectful. But what they actually mean, I think, is a compliment. And that is what we have built is a team who together, collectively, perform for the football club. And I think that sums up Preston North End. We're not the highest payers in terms of the spend on the squad. We're not the highest payers in terms of transfer fees. But we lose a lot of money, as every championship club does, without player trading. We're supported magnificently by the Hemmings family. They're putting in between 13 and 15 million pounds a year. They never miss a beat on that. Nobody worries about are we going to pay our bills. Football clubs don't worry about are we going to pay the transfer fees. But we're not the top spenders. Therefore, we'd like to think we have to work smarter as a collective. And I think as a collective we do work smarter. That can be frustrating for the supporters. But I think if I were to sum up Preston North End, I think it's the values are people trust us. Sometimes they like us, and I'm not sure that's good news because I don't necessarily want us to be liked. I want us to be respected. But I think most people would say we're an established championship team that punch above our weight. Now, what I want to do is punch even more above our weight and get promoted.
But how difficult is that in the championship? 11th season in the championship for Preston North End, established. 7th has been the highest. Last season was the lowest in 20th. How difficult is it for North End to compete with these teams? Because there's so much money in the championship. There's so many teams that have been in the Premier League with the whole parachute payments, different sort of budgets, and North End compete regularly to establish themselves in there, and everyone's desperate for them just to take that next step. But it is so difficult just to establish in the championship because big clubs have gone down to League One.
On the one hand, it's getting harder because some of the wages people are paying now, not just the parachute clubs, are eye-watering. The agents' fees they're paying are eye-watering, and the transfer fees they're paying are eye-watering. I think our transfer record is 2.2 million euros on Millertown in history. We were talking to clubs about a couple of players this summer and they wanted £6 million for the players, and we've never paid that. So yeah, it's a challenge, but they can only have a 25-man squad just like us. So what we have to find is the 25 people that we can afford to buy or loan, and we can afford to pay and want to play at Preston. And there's a lot of players out there, so it's getting the mix right and it's attracting the ones you want to attract. And for everyone you can't afford, there's another 2 or 3 you can, but you have to pick the ones that you think can actually benefit from the input the coaching team are doing. And football managers are paid a lot of money, and the coaches are paid a lot of money. If you just bought the finished article, you don't need a manager and you don't need coaches. So what you actually want to do is to get a manager and coach who can actually say, I like what I'm seeing, but I'll make them even better. And that's what I think Paul and his team are doing. But is it any easier? No, it's tough, and it's far harder than it was. Like, I got to the player final with Cardiff in 2010. That team wouldn't today, no disrespect to them, necessarily get to the player final today with everything that's going on around us, because you've got 4 parachute clubs this year, plus Wrexham and Birmingham spending significant amount of money. Not criticising them, they've got the cash so they can spend it. You've got other clubs like Stoke who've always invested very well. So instead of having 3 or 4 clubs, you've probably got 7 or 8 that are way out of our league in terms of wage levels or transfer fee levels. But I think if you make that as an excuse, you don't progress. What you have to do is believe in your own skills, believe in the management team we've got here and working together. I hate the words work smarter, but if they are relevant, that's what we try and do. And apart from last year where we fell off the edge of a cliff after the Cup quarter-final, we've done very well. We've been 14th or above every year with the 21st wage bill. And we don't get...
That doesn't get spoken about a lot, does it?
Well...
That 21st...
No, but nobody cares, do they? Do you know what I mean?
That's the reality, though, isn't it?
It is a reality, but the supporters don't want to hear us say it's the 21st wage bill because they do 2 things. One is say spend more, or just think we're whinging or whatever else. It is what it is. I'm not whinging about it. The family are putting in millions of pounds to keep this club going. We've tried to look after our supporters. Our season tickets are £294 a season for an adult. which is £13 a game. You know, we're trying very hard to engender a collective spirit here at the football club to engage the supporters, who've been brilliant, by the way, and they're desperate for success as well. But if we just sit here and say, you know, we're 21st wage bill, so anything above that's not bad, is it? We'll never get anywhere. You know, I've spent a lot of time in the Premier League. I've been lucky enough to be in the Premier League with Leeds. We won the second tier title in 1990. We won the top tier title in 92. I've been in the Champions League. I've been at a player final with Cardiff, been to a cup final, player final with Preston, which is probably one of my outstanding memories because of our history in playoffs.
We broke the hoodoo.
Yeah, broke the hoodoo. It was fantastic. Yeah. And, you know, I want to be back in the Premier League. So if I'm still here when we get there, I'll enjoy it. If I have to watch from a distance when Preston get there, I'll still enjoy it. Because as a club, you know, we're surrounded by clubs in Lancashire who've been there. And nothing will make me more proud of being a part of Preston North End going into the Premier League.
Just with all of the elements in play when it comes to Championship football that Mel's was talking about, and with reference to the ownership of the football club, you spoke at the end of last season about the fact that you've been in conversation with 5 or 6 parties over the last 12 months about a potential change of ownership. And you said that those deals are now off the table. Is that still the case? Can you give us an update 6-7 months down the line of what the situation is?
Sure. Well, if you ask me on any day of the week, there's probably still 3 or 4 parties talking, but not the same ones who were talking 3 or 4 months ago. Look, the Hemmings family made it absolutely clear that Mr. Hemmings left absolute instruction that wherever the Hemmings family own the football club, they will do what they've always done, which is support it financially, look after us. They care passionately about our success. But when I started in football, it was the local sort of businessman done good, who had a few millions, who looked after the football club.
It's changed a bit since then, hasn't it?
Then it became you had to be a multimillionaire. Then you had to be a billionaire. Now it's venture capital companies. Then it's states running it. And we're competing with people who aren't just the local person made good. And for this club to move forward, what we've said is, and they've said, is if somebody comes along that are the right people, and they stress the right, that nobody's sitting here asking too much money for the football club, the price for the club is almost irrelevant. Is there a party who can take this club to the next level? And if they can, the Hemmings family will sell to them. At the moment, there is nobody who's gone past the first line of, we like it, we're interested, we're talking to you. And then you say, right, well, show us how much money you've got. And then you don't hear from them. It's like my phone's been turned off. But one day it'll happen. Yeah. Is that for the betterment of the club? Time will tell. Where I'm personally worried about English football is I'm not convinced everybody who's investing in English football today is investing for the long term. I think there are some clubs, I won't say who, but some clubs who are now owned by funds who, in my experience of these funds, they want to return on the cash. And the way they get that is to sell it on to somebody else or do whatever. They're not necessarily there because they want to be part of the community or part of what the football club's history stands for. Maybe I'm being naive and maybe people say I need to sort of stop being a dinosaur.
So what sort of things are you looking for then in what would be a potential new investor? Are you looking for authenticity, I suppose, is one thing, both with the finances and in character? Are there any other things that maybe you're looking out for? Because as you say, the Hemmings family obviously have such a connection with the club. So to continue that would be probably of the utmost importance.
I think the critical thing is that you have to believe that the club will be sustainable on a long-term basis, because what I'd hate to see is somebody who comes in, gives them short-term success, which everybody enjoys, and then they get into financial difficulty. Because our supporters, a lot of our supporters have been watching the football club for years. You know, I spoke to one of our supporters on Friday who was 90 years old.
Wow.
Been watching the club for 79 years. And she's just passionate for us to get into the Premier League in her lifetime. But that says what this club means to people. And she's not alone in terms of the numbers of people we've got here who've been watching the club for years and years, or their families have. And what we want to see is to make sure that sustainability and, you know, Preston North End can compete and be a football club in its community for years to come. So somebody who just wants to come in and do a short-term hit with loads of cash and then disappear again, in my view, isn't what the club needs. Now, it's not my club. but the Hemmings family are very keen to make sure that whoever comes in here comes in for the right reasons and wants to take this club forward. And if they turn up, they will be welcomed.
How about some of the best memories and moments you've had in your position at PNE over the last, 14 years now? You've already mentioned the playoff final at Wembley. Would that be right up there as probably your fondest memory or your favourite memory?
Look, it has to be the fondest memory for all sorts of reasons. I mean, first of all, we thought we were going to get promoted at Colchester a couple of weeks before that. And that was one of the most disappointing days I've had because, they were fighting relegation. We were trying to go up as one of the 2 automatic promoted teams. I think Bristol City went up, didn't they, as champions. Weirdly, if you'd have said to me, I can guarantee you'll win the playoff final as opposed to go up automatically, I'd take winning the playoff final.
A lot of people say that's almost the best way to do it in front of the full Wembley. And
it's just a wonderful occasion.
Yeah.
I was at the first ever playoffs in 1987 with Leeds United. When it wasn't at Wembley, it was home and away against Charlton, and we lost in a third game. Last 8 minutes, we lost 2-1.
Playoffs has been great though, hasn't it, for football?
Playoffs are brilliant for football. So, having been there in 87, and then with Cardiff against Blackpool, which was my last game, I'd already agreed to sell the club to Vincent Tan. So professionally, I wanted to win that game desperately. I think financially, the deal would have been too cheap.
I think North End fans wanted you to win.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand. So having sort of had the lows of not winning, to go to Wembley and to win in such style, but even then, until we went 4 up, I didn't believe it.
Game was done by half time though, wasn't it?
Sort of. Look, I was just 2009 was a fascinating year for all sorts of reasons, including with Cardiff at Preston. But we went at Cardiff to Peterborough on the 29th of December 2009 and we were winning 4-0 at half time. And all my fellow directors were jumping around the boardroom and saying what a great performance, etc. And I said then, just wait till the final whistle, and they laughed at me, and we drew 4-4.
Been burned by that one over the years, yeah.
About 3 weeks later, we went to Bristol and we were 4 up at half time. And I kept everybody calm and actually won 6-1, I think it was, or 6-0 But
we'll talk about sixes.
Yeah,
that brings us very nicely on
some. There's been a few sixes. Some I've enjoyed, some I haven't.
Well, I have to ask you because I was at North End at the time when Preston beat Cardiff when you were at Cardiff. We won the game 6-0. Dave Jones was your manager of Cardiff at the time, and I'll always remember. I mean, it was me and John Parkin up front, and probably not the slimmest of strikers in the Championship at the time. But anyway, we'd done a really great result.
I thought you were fine. I'm not sure about John.
Yeah, but after the game, it was a time when we'd done the warm down and everyone was milling about the tunnel. And I'll always remember you coming down to speak to your manager, and you went into the physio room, which was next door to the home dressing room. You cleared out the Preston physio, Jacko. So Jacko, out you go. And then you went to talk to the Cardiff manager. Now, I didn't hear this. This is off John Parkin. And Parkin will back this up. And all he could hear was the two of you shouting, you've just been beaten 6-0. And he was laughing his head off, saying, he's just said in there that you've let 2 fat strikers run your team ragged. But that was a big game for us because we got in the playoffs ahead of Cardiff that season by 1 goal scored. So what happened? Tell us what happened in the physio room. You just said 1 fat striker, didn't you, Parky?
Well, I didn't say it. Dave did. I was fuming because before the game I'd been talking to Dave on the pitch and saying, look, whatever happens, just make sure we don't get beat today. A 0-0 draw, boring, suit me down to the ground, because then Preston couldn't overtake Cardiff to get into the playoffs. And not only did we get beat 6-0, but Ross McCaughan missed a penalty. And that penalty, as it subsequently transpired, obviously didn't know that for 2 or 3 weeks, was the difference between Cardiff being in the playoffs and Preston. And I just thought Dave, having sort of laughed at me for saying have a boring 0-0 draw, had watched us get beat 6-0. So it was only the second time, I think, in my career I've ever berated a manager after a game. I probably learned the lessons, but Terry Burton told me off that day for shouting at Dave. But the following day, I did the same again to him back at Cardiff. But I told him what I thought about him, because I thought that as chairman of the football club, I don't ever want to watch a team what I thought was a total capitulation. I mean, anybody can get beaten, but I thought it was a disgrace, and I wasn't prepared to tolerate it. And yeah, I heard Dave shout that at certainly at John.
So it was Dave, not you, saying that.
Dave said it on me. I wouldn't be that disrespectful.
He's washing his hands of calling you that,
Yeah.
so we're all good for now. Obviously, we've spoken about appointing managers. That's one facet of what you do. There's also the other side of it. You've spoken about having difficult conversations with managers just there. Letting them go is obviously another part of the job. How difficult is that, and what are those conversations like around about those kind of times when these things happen? It can't be easy.
I think hiring manager is harder than firing a manager, to be honest, because in the main, if you're letting a manager go, it shouldn't be a surprise. I work every day at the football club, and my relationship with the manager is literally on a daily basis. And therefore, if you're having a tough time, you'd like to think that whilst you're supportive, you're also honest. And therefore, if you get to a stage where any manager's been told it's time for a change, if they're totally shocked, I'd be disappointed. I was actually shocked when Ryan told me he'd had enough, but after one game. But I think that in the main, in my career, if you've had to say to a manager, look, it's time for a change, they see it coming. And with probably one exception in my career, managers have accepted, and some indeed have reapplied to come back. And I've given quite a few managers I've worked with references into the jobs that they have been in or are currently in.
So a lot of the time it's no hard feelings.
He's not
and
naming
there's an
names here, though,
understanding.
right? You're not naming names there, are you, in terms of who was that?
You can have a competition at the end of the season to see which managers we're talking about. So, look, is it easy? No, of course not. But is it a surprise? It shouldn't be. Because I've always believed in life that if you're paid to manage people and work with people, you owe them, HR people tell you have sort of annual appraisals and stuff. And the problem I've got with things like that is you can't just sit there for a year and write down the good bits and the bad bits, and then it's a surprise at the end of the year. You'd like to think on a daily basis, part of managing people is to help shape their career and what they're doing. And if they're doing things you think are good, you should be saying, well done, and learn from that or whatever. And if they're not doing so well, you need to explain why you don't think they're doing so well. And again, work with them to try and do better. Of course, the thing about football managers, there's something every day when you wake up which is called a league table. And when you look at that, it gives you half a clue. And then you look at my email inbox, and if you're not doing well, that gives you a definite clue when the fans tell you what they think about you. And they tend to tell me what they think about me as opposed to the manager, but it's reflective of the club as a whole. So I don't want to pretend it's easy or I enjoy it, but I find it far harder to attract and recruit the good managers because they're not that many, and the ones there are therefore by definition difficult to attract. And if they're really, really good, you'd assume they're in a good job somewhere.
I think also there's the element of the unknown with it as well. You don't know whether a manager is going to be a success 100% until they've had a few games and a few months down the line. Whereas when it comes to the end of a manager's tenure, you've already got the evidence of whether things are going well or not. So there's probably that at play as well.
Yeah, and sometimes, I've learned this over the years, you hope it'll turn. So sometimes you're going for too long. And
I was going to ask you that.
Timing's
have you
crucial.
ever felt as though I want to sack him, but maybe not, and you've not, and it has turned around?
No,
it's not. It's never turned around.
No, that I think you know, and I think you hope you're wrong, and I think once you know, you've got to do it, and sometimes you just hope it'll turn, and therefore you let it go on a bit longer. Interesting enough, with Dave Jones, when I was at Cardiff, the fans were giving me real grief autumn of 2007 and saying, he's got to go and it's a disgrace, etc., with no money. And I thought he was doing a really good job. And I fronted up the fans and said I thought it was the right man for the job, etc. And we got to the FA Cup final that year for the first time since 1927. Then the next year after, as you've already said, we missed out on the playoffs by a goal score, and the year after we got to the playoff final. I felt vindicated with doing that, but I never personally thought it was right to change. Mm-hmm. There have been some managers, a manager particularly, but on the odd occasion where you just knew you had to change and went on too long and you still had to change. And then the question is, can you retrieve the implications of changing later? I've never been relegated, so I'd like to think that I've got over the fact I probably waited too long and I was indecisive. But the other hard thing is, if you will get to a point where you think you might need to change, what you do have to do is know what you're going to do next. Because, there's 2 games every week and sometimes 3. So you don't have a lot of time. So I've always hoped that I'd have in the top right-hand drawer a list of managers who, if you had to, you could talk to. But it doesn't mean to say you can get them or that they want to come to you. So that's the bigger challenge, not deciding when to change, it's who to change for.
Are you going to ask him, or shall I, about when he arrived at Preston and quickly changed manager? You can. Go on, you ask him.
Why don't both of you decide not to ask me?
Well, you came in 6th of December 2011, so as we say, almost 14 years ago now. And little over a week, you have your first big decision to make, which is to relieve Phil Brown of his duties. What was that first 10 days at North End like for you, with that particular decision and just generally arriving at the club?
Yeah, I think the decision had been taken before I arrived here. I mean, we'd been through a very difficult period. I think having had a very good start to the season, I think we then went about, 17 games without winning a game or something.
Yeah, I got injured.
Well, I went to Hartlepool to watch...
Last career goal there.
The
Tuesday night in Hartlepool. What a horrible fixture list that was.
So I went to watch that game.
It was awful, wasn't it?
I think Stuckman had a great game.
Yeah, he did.
If I remember rightly.
There was only one goal scored in the game, though, wasn't there?
Then I was offered the job that day. Okay. Yeah, there was, by somebody not too far from me.
Don't give him.
So you were offered it then? Okay.
So I was offered the job that day. I saw Mr. Hemmings that day, which is why I came up to Hartlepool. And then I joined, I think it was the following Monday. First game was, I think was it Peterborough in the Football League trophy was called in those days, Johnson's Paint or whatever. And then Stevenage the following Saturday.
The classic 0-0 at Deepdale.
It was. Look, the decision had been taken. Mr. Hemmings just asked me to confirm to him that his gut instincts were right before we acted, and we did. And then the hardest job was to attract, because we were in a difficult space. We'd been relegated to League One. We hadn't had the best of starts in League One. And with due respect to those who applied, it wasn't an extensive list in terms of length.
So not 60 like now.
It was half a dozen. And in terms of fit, I don't want to be disparaging to anybody who applied, but in terms of fit, it was difficult. There was one person who I've always wanted to work with who, I think to his own admission, didn't do as well in the interviews as he'd hoped and I'd hoped, and he's gone on to be very successful. And the standout candidate for good or ill was Graham Wesley, who was doing really well at Stevenage. There was also a feeling inside the club, for good or ill, and Neil will know better than me, that the dressing room probably needed to be sorted out. And if Graham did one thing well, and I still speak to Graham, he admits some of the things he got right, some of the things he didn't get right. I think he did a good job of starting to do that. But clearly it was unsustainable, and sometimes if you make an appointment and for whatever reason you realise it needs to change quickly, and that was 13 months I think, because he signed on Friday the 13th of January, and he didn't want to sign. We were at 5 to 12, he didn't want to sign because it was Friday the 13th, but we made him sign anyway, and I think he left on the 13th of February the following year. But we knew on this occasion what I was going to do when we changed. I'd already done my homework and done what I now do every time, which is to have a list of who you'd like if you could. And we were successful in fulfilling that with bringing Simon Grayson in.
So we've spoken about bringing managers in, bringing players in, letting managers go, but that is not the everyday of your job. So what does a general day in the life of Peter Ridsdale look like? What time are you getting up? When you're getting to the training ground, what does your day-to-day operation look like away from the bigger decisions, if you will?
Well, I'm in here about 7:45 every morning.
Don't give too much away. Do people be following you to work?
It's fine. I mean, I leave home the same time every morning, 10 to 7. I'm in here at 7:45 every morning. I'm in here every day unless I'm doing EFL work or seeing other people for business. Leave 6:30ish. I've missed one game in 14 years, which was my first season.
Which game?
Last game of the season, away to Bournemouth, lost 1-0. one of my wife's family were getting married, which I've never forgiven them for. And Mr. Hemming said to go to the wedding, which benefit of hindsight. I'm not sure whether I should or shouldn't. Anyway, I missed
move the wedding to Bournemouth in the end of the season.
Did I manage? I'll be careful what I say now. My daughter got married last year, and she chose a day in the football season, which I said I'd never forget her for. Somehow, spectacularly, don't know how we did this, Sky chose the game for the Sunday. So I managed to do the wedding and the game. So that was all right. So I'm in here every day, other than if I'm doing other work for the club or indeed the EFL. If the team are in on a weekend, so if they come in on a Sunday, I come in on a Sunday because I think we're all in it together. I haven't told them they have a day off in the week and I don't. But it's a privilege, to be honest, to be doing it. So it's hardly a hardship. I'm also privileged to be one of the 3 Championship reps on the EFL board, which you have to stand for election, and I'm one of the selected EFL reps from the board to be on the professional game board of the FA. What I think that does do is it gives, and that is a personal appointment, you stand personally as opposed to as a club, but what it does do is give Preston North End a seat round the table on some of the big issues, and whether we can influence them or not, I wouldn't be big-headed enough to believe we can, but we can have an input. And I think our ability to be at the table talking about, parachute payments, redistribution, financial fair play rules, etc., I think is something that I'd like to think the club benefit from.
So you've been around the game a long time, many, many years, and it still seems, talking to you now, that the hunger's still there. You're still involved in various different guises of which you've just been talking about, and it feels like there's no end in sight for you. It's kind of carry on and keep doing what you love. Well,
when we're losing, the fans want the end in sight very quickly. Look, I love what I'm doing. I'm very proud of what we do here with the investment we've got. We've got a great team. We've talked about the football management team. We've got a great team off the field as well. And I'm just the leader of that team. So we've got some people who work very hard and do a very good job, who are unsung heroes, really. I'll carry on doing this as long as the Hemmings family want me to do it. I'd like to get us to the Premier League before everybody says you've had enough. And as I say, I'm very, very proud and privileged to be doing it. I love it. And this is a wonderful football club, and I can think of nothing better than to talk to you again in the near future and say, isn't it great? We're looking forward to the Premier League.
What are some of the big topics that you do talk about? Because you mentioned about the wage cap, which has been spoken about quite a lot at the moment. The distribution of money is imbalanced massively at the moment. Homegrown rules, VAR, will we see VAR in the Championship? Do we want to see VAR in the Championship? All these sort of topics which you have a real say in and aware of some of the issues which maybe some of the fans aren't aware of what's actually being spoken about and how the game can be helped from some of these issues. Just answer that VAR one. Is it? I'm so against VAR in the Championship. I watch it in the Premier League and there's no consistency with it. I feel as though VAR is a subjective decision. VAR should be used twice a season for blatant errors, and I feel as though so many are subjective, and it delays the game and it confuses what are the rules, the frustration within a stadium. That's, to me, not what football is all about. I go to the Championship, I love watching the Championship. I want North End in the Premier League, but I just love the reality of passion, and it's real without VAR.
But I actually agree with you, but just to play devil's advocate here, we heard Peter earlier talk about some of the decisions that have gone against North End this season. Currently, clubs in the playoffs could be even higher than 4th with VAR potentially. So I agree with you, Mels, but I can see both sides of the argument.
I can see both sides, but where I think it's difficult, the excitement of the game is, and Neil knows this better than I ever will know it, scoring a goal is special. To score a goal and not know whether you've scored a goal because you don't know if it's going to be called back for VAR, and then they take 4 minutes to decide whether or not his knee was offside, or somebody who's got size 12 boots was ahead of somebody with size 10 boots. That's not the game as I see it. Now, PGMO will tell you that they get on average 87% of the decisions right without VAR, and they'll tell you they get about 97 right with VAR. So in theory, everybody should be saying, you need VAR. However, I think as it currently is, I think it spoils the game. I think even with VAR, and we had this with Liverpool the other day with Van Dijk's header, they still can't decide if that was a goal or not. So you use VAR, and even after VAR, Nobody can decide if it's a goal or not. Well, is that really what the supporters want? I think what the supporters want is the thrill and the excitement of what you see in the Championship. If there's something that's so glaringly obvious, I think there was one in, was it the playoffs last year, was it Orient, where there was an offside goal and he was so far offside it was unbelievable. I understand when things like that happen and people say if you had VAR it would be changed. If it was down to me with technology as it currently stands, I would be against it. If technology advances to such an extent that you can have almost an instantaneous decision without debate, and then you have to decide what that's going to look at. Is it just offsides? Is it did the ball go over the line? All these sort of things. I understand as technology advances, you may well revisit it. But today, I think the Championship is better for not having it.
Are we safe that it won't be in for at least?
Well, it's very expensive. Needs a lot of cameras. It also needs a lot of personnel. So one of the biggest issues you've got is you've not just got the referee of the day, but you've then got all the people in the VAR having a look at the games.
That's another thing. Why do we need an assistant VAR? Have you seen that? The VAR. So you've got a VAR.
I understand.
And there's an assistant VAR. I'm saying more confusion.
Well, there's about
more input, more subjectivity.
Three or four in there, aren't there? So in terms of just the personnel, we're already saying that we're stretched for the number of qualified referees we've got. And then suddenly you bring in VAR, which requires even more people to be involved in it. So going back again to the question, if it was down to me, I wouldn't want it. I think it's expensive. I think it's some years away from in the Championship. They are looking at some new technology for certain things, which would be instantaneous, not full VAR. And again, as I say, if technology advances to a stage where the game can improve, fine. But you're there on the terraces or wherever, and you're watching a game, and when the ball goes in the net, you want to celebrate. Not wait 4 minutes to celebrate.
Well, imagine if your goal for North End at Blackpool got checked for VAR. That's a great moment for you. That would have been.
You can find a reason to disallow that goal because I'm battling with the centre half, and you could say that's a foul. It's not a foul, but that's where I feel as though the game is at. The subjectivity of interpretation of is that a foul or not a foul.
Well, for example, I've seen recent weeks penalties given in the Championship, and you've looked and said, really? And then you've seen penalties not given, and people have said, we think it was a penalty. You then watch VAR saying, was it a penalty or wasn't it a penalty? And even afterwards, you've got 50% of the people saying they disagree with the VAR decision. So if it's not going to be absolute in its solution, leave it as it is, which is without it.
Let's go back to many years ago now, when you first started getting involved in football. Let's go back to the time when the referee would have been a school teacher from Northumberland, for example. I want to know from you what your memories were watching football growing up. We know your association with Leeds United, both in a professional capacity, but also a personal capacity. Growing up, I presume you're a Leeds fan. Tell us about some of the players you used to watch and some of the games you remember and who was your hero growing up and things like that.
Well, look, I was lucky because shortly after I started watching Leeds as a young boy, we had the Don River team. So I obviously remember going to the 1965 Cup final, just to show how old I am, queuing all night to get a ticket.
How much was a ticket back then?
I can't remember, but my father dropped me off at the stadium the night before tickets went on sale with my programme, with all the vouchers you had to collect to be able to get a priority for a ticket. And the queue was all the way around the car park at Elland Road. And I was outside just in Elland Road itself. And he just left me there and said, go to the phone box tomorrow and phone me when you've got a ticket. I'll come and pick you up again. And I was like 12 years old or something, 13 years old. So obviously the FA Cup final, first time Leeds had ever been there, was against Liverpool. First time Liverpool had won the FA Cup, went to extra time. So that team between that period, 65 and 74, was fantastic. They won the League Cup, they won the league title twice. They won the FA Cup. So you're a bit spoilt, really. And then obviously watched them through when it sort of declined after Don Revie left. Brian Clough went in briefly. And then Leeds got relegated in 82. And then I went on the board, still as a fan, but I sponsored Leeds with Topman on the shirts. I was chief executive of Topman. I went on the board of Leeds in 87. And it was all great after that because playoff final we lost, but as second tier team trying to get the top flight, we got to the FA Cup semi-final, lost to Coventry who won the cup, Howard Wilkinson came in and we won the title at Bournemouth against Harry Redknapp's Bournemouth. They got relegated. 2 years later, won the top title last year before the Premier League. So they were great times. You know, Tony Bower, some of those goals he scored, you still see. One against Liverpool, I think. And then after 10 years as a non-exec, I ended up being chairman. And for 5 years as chairman, we're never outside of the top 5 of the Premier League, which was fantastic. You know, UEFA Cup semi-final, Champions League semi-final. And then when I left, despite all the criticism, we were still well and truly in the Premier League, and 15 months later got relegated. It was all my fault. But I left 23 full internationals when I left. So I feel a bit unfairly criticised. Did people make mistakes? Of course. Was it a great team I left? Yeah, it was a good team I left. But I've been lucky because I've been involved for 38 years. And I've seen a lot of highs. I've had a few lows. But the lows just remind you how good the highs are.
Did you ever play football when you were younger?
I was going to ask, I was going to think, what position were you?
Well, scarily looking at me, you won't guess, but I was actually a goalkeeper, but I never grew tall enough, really, although the England goalkeeper, when I was growing up, was 5'9", I think. Played for Yorkshire schoolboys, but that was it. So
It was a good level back then, though, wasn't it?
It was a good level, because obviously academies weren't around. Funnily enough, I went to a school that played rugby, not football, so it was difficult, and then eventually they accepted football. Played weekends, but watched Leeds home and away. As a child. So I played at a level, but I won't pretend I was okay as a goalkeeper, but my hero was Gary Sprake, so it was quite good being a goalkeeper in those days.
So you're queuing up outside Ellen Road in the mid-60s, which means you would have been a youngster when England won the World Cup.
66, remember it well. Yeah.
Tell us what that was like, because we've got a national team now where many people are tipping England to do big things. They've reached finals of major tournaments, semi-finals of the World Cup. And there's a World Cup on the horizon next summer. But tell us what that feeling is like, because many people, myself and Mel's and our generation, won't remember.
I'm not tipping them, by the way.
No. Many people. I wasn't pinning you. But what was that like around the country when England won the World Cup?
Well, what's amazing is I think that it just shows you how powerful football is, because people who are living through those times politically, it was difficult politically in terms of the economics of the country at the time, and I think the Labour government are coming in 64. I think they won the election, and there was another couple, I think 66ish. But then England won the World Cup, and the Prime Minister and the country said that the England team changed everybody's outlook as a country. The optimism in the country, driven by an England football team winning the World Cup. And it was almost a pivotal moment in people's lives. But it was a football match. But we won the World Cup. And you look back at some of those players, you know, and obviously I'd seen Jack Charlton play for Leeds regularly, and obviously people like Bobby and Alan Ball, who Leeds tried to sign. Obviously Jeff Hurst, who I've got to know reasonably well just through football since then, seeing Wembley regularly with his hat-trick. I don't think, as a child, I mean, I was 14, I realised just how important it was. I only realise now because we haven't won it since. It was a great day, but as a country, the national pride around England winning the World Cup, you could feel it. And literally every day, people were going to work with a smile on their face because we were World Cup winners. It's a football match. But that's how important it was to the nation as a whole. And obviously we've never seen anything like it since.
It's still big, though. It's so big, isn't it, football? If we were to win the World Cup, the country would come to a standstill to watch it for starters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even now. Absolutely.
But it just shows you how lucky, and I've used the word privileged a couple of times, but how privileged we are to be involved in the game. You particularly, so obviously you were an outstanding professional, but that's what it means to people. That's what it means to people's lives. And that's why when I get emails on a Saturday night if we've lost, and some of them are horrific, I mean, so distasteful. But I have to remind myself it's because it means so much to people. You know, football is part of their life, and Preston North End winning or England winning or whatever is very much a part of their life. And what I have to do when I read these emails is to realise, put myself in the sort of the eyes of the person writing the email, realise why they've done it in the first place. And very often, because I respond to all of them, the next day they'll apologise and say, you need to understand how frustrated I was. I say, yeah, I know, I was at the game. I feel the same way.
So I feel like, the whole England talk there, winning the World Cup, feels like if North End were to get promoted, it would feel like such a landmark thing because it's been so long.
Well, ask me a question and I'll answer it honestly. Which would I prefer? I would prefer Preston North End to get promoted into the Premier League than England win the World Cup.
I agree. Do you agree?
Yeah, why not?
It would be so historic because it's been so long, and the impact that would have on the whole community would be huge and would have a lasting effect for many, many years, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, with that in mind then, you've spoken about all of your years in the game, all of the experiences you've had, the roles you've been in, what you've seen, what you've done, and what North End means to people. So to finish off, what does North End mean to you?
Well, what's quite interesting is people say to me, oh, you're a Leeds fan growing up, or you're chairman of Leeds or whatever, so you can't understand what it means to Preston North End fans. Anybody who's worked in real jobs realises that when they move from that job to the next job, the passion they've got moves into the latest job, the people who are paying you. And whatever you've done in the past is experience, but the passion changes. I am totally passionate about Preston North End. All I want is to win football matches, and all I want is us to get promoted. And therefore there'll be nothing in my career that will give me the same pride as Preston North End getting promoted to the Premier League.
Peter, it's been brilliant to chat. Thanks so much. Thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Neil Mellor scored.
Thank you.
Preston take the lead. And that's exactly what it means to Neil Mellor to score in the West Lancashire derby.